unaccompanied minors seeking asylum in this country that have been housed in hotels and have gone missing. Well, a little earlier, I spoke to Dame Sara Thornton, who spent 30 years in the police and she was Chief Constable of Thames Valley. She was also appointed by Theresa May to be the Independent Anti-Slavery Commissioner. And I started by asking her what had happened.
Well, we know that organised crime groups will target vulnerable children. And unaccompanied asylum-seeking children are vulnerable, they're separated from their families, they may have been traumatised. I think it's clear that the traffickers and the exploiters have been targeting them. They know where they are in the hotels and they're preying on these children. And my real fear is that the boys will be locked in cannabis farms, they may be involved in county lines, drug distribution, and the girls may well end up in the sex industry. So there's a real concern about the risk of these children and young people.
You know, we're just talking about the numbers involved here, almost 200, and you're talking about the organised crime that they may be falling into. I just find it astonishing. It's staggering. How is this only coming to light now?
So, in fact, I think there are 440 that have been reported missing, of whom 200 are still unaccounted for. That's the real concern. But it does seem to me that government have been given warnings about this, which they appear to have failed to heed. I mean, back in the summer last year, in 2022, the Home Affairs Committee said the placement of children in these hotels, which is unlawful, needed to stop. The Independent Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration also raised the issue back in October. He said the hotels were fine as a crisis response, but it had become a core response and it needed to stop. And then the children's charity, ECPAT, made a report last year when there were 45 missing children. Now there are 440. So the situation has escalated. Children mustn't be placed in these hotels. They need to be properly supported by local authorities, and the local authorities need to be funded in order to do so.
So actually the answer to my question, why is this only coming to light now, is even more depressing. It has been known for some time, but actually the reality is that no action has been taken. Who does the buck stop with?
I'm afraid it's just got worse and worse.
Who does the buck stop with? Who do you blame?
Well, the issue is partly caused by the number of people coming across the channel in small boats. And that clearly overwhelmed Kent County Council. And they said to the government, we can't continue to provide the support that we should provide. And that's why, as an interim measure, as an emergency measure, the Home Office set up these hotels. But that was 18 months, 2 years ago. The law requires local authorities to protect and safeguard children, and that's what needs to happen. Government needs to work with the local authorities and needs to make available adequate funding so they can do it properly. These children are vulnerable, they need to be supported, ideally, I think, in foster homes, but certainly in specialist care facilities for them.
There's a lot of talk in politics about a so-called hostile environment for people trying to come to the United Kingdom. Do you worry that some of the impact of that has been, I guess, that the system hasn't cared for some of these minors in the way that it should have?
I think sometimes when you hear people talk about young Albanian people, it's as if somehow they don't count and they're not the same as our children. You know, the law in this country makes no differentiation between children on the basis of their nationality, nor indeed whether they're migrants. So an Albanian child who's 16 years old has all the rights under the Children's Act that a British child would have. And I think we would want to treat children in that way and not differentiate in the way that appears to be happening.
Thank you for some really powerful words on this case. It's something that I'm very pleased that we've been able to highlight on the programme today. If I may, I did just want to talk about the death of Zara Alina. Now, Zara is the law graduate who was brutally murdered walking home in a random attack. Now, it's come to light that her killer was wrongly assessed as medium risk and opportunities were missed that could have saved her life. What state is the probation service currently in?
Can I just say that an absolutely horrific murder, and my heart goes out to the family and friends of Zara. But I was interested when reading about this case that the Chief Inspector of Probation talked about systemic issues in the probation service. Not only were there substantial delays in the case being reviewed, it was then given to a newly qualified probation officer who assessed the cases as medium. And then after he'd been released from prison, he repeatedly breached his license conditions, and a recall was made for him to be recalled to prison. But unfortunately, Sara was murdered before that could happen. And I think it just points out the fact that if we are going to release people on license before the end of their sentence, then we need a probation service that is properly equipped and funded and resourced to ensure that the public can be properly and adequately protected, because clearly in this case, Sara was not protected.
So do you think that the probation service isn't being properly funded and resourced right now?
I think that's certainly the case. In the time when I was a police officer, there were reforms of the probation service which just appeared to reduce its capacity and capability to do the job that the staff in the organisation wanted to do. And this case, I've heard people interviewed from the probation service who talk about massive caseloads, and how on earth can a probation officer do their job properly if they're being asked to supervise many, many cases. And then when it's not adequately resourced, these awful things happen, as happened to Sara Thornton.
Yeah, that's certainly, we've certainly seen the worst possible consequences of that with her case. There's been a lot of discussion about culture in the police. I just wonder, as someone, who've obviously been involved in the police in your time, the Commissioner, Mark Rowley, is saying that 2 or 3 Met Police officers every week expected to be appearing in court on criminal charges. Is the culture rotten?
So I think we've all been horrified by recent cases. And it does raise serious questions about the culture, because I think you can't keep on saying it's just one bad apple, it's another bad apple. And I do think that Sir Mark Rowley has got a huge challenge on his hands. He needs to be absolutely fearless and robust in rooting out those people who should not be police officers. But his challenge, of course, is he's got to do that at the same time as maintaining the morale of all the decent officers who are committed to public service. And he's also got to have an eye on thinking about who we're going to recruit in the future. We want to have a police service which people want to join, so they too can help protect the public and serve the public.
Did you witness any of this kind of bad behaviour, I guess, in your time in the police?
When I was first a constable, but that's nearly 40 years ago, there was a kind of casual sexism, I guess. So women got treated differently. You would never, ever post 2 women in a patrol car together, and that was kind of institutionalised. Things have moved on a long way. And I always used to say, and it's 7 years since I left the police service in terms of a police force, by the time you're a chief constable, it would take a very brave person to be directly and openly sexist towards you. So towards the end of my service, it wasn't an issue, but for sure, 30, 40 years ago, it was part of the system.